So let me tell you a bit about me, and let me tell you a bit about Affinity Photo. Um, I set up the Mac user group here in Suffolk in the UK 15 years ago. Um, and as a professional photographer myself, we attracted a lot of photographers. Even today, I think most of our members use a camera of some sort. So quite a lot of our meetings revolve around photography and photographic apps like this one. Um, I originally ran a class for our group 3 years ago on Affinity Photo, and it was spread across 5 meetings, and each of those meetings was 2 hours long, so it was a 10-hour course. And what I hope to share with you today and at the end of next month is a kind of lightning tour, just to give you a taste of what this incredible package can do. We're all amazed by it. And if you use Photoshop already, which I know a small number of people do, the move from Photoshop to Affinity Photo is actually incredibly easy because they're very, very similar. And I, all I can say is I think Serif must have some very powerful um, law people in office, because how they haven't broken copyrights and stuff with Adobe, I simply don't know. Anyway, I'm going to start really simple. By the end of the second session, it will not be so simple. So I really hope you enjoy this. I'm going to move fairly quickly. As you'll see, I've got a nice big cursor on screen so you can see where it's going. I'm also going to use a little app that shows you keystrokes like this. That's a command left square bracket key. Because I'm only using a small number of shortcuts, but they make an enormous difference to the amount of time that we'll spend staring at pictures while we fix them. So let's have a quick look around the landscape. This is the interface. Absolutely terrifying to the uninitiated, I think, the first time you open this, because there's so much of it. So at the top, we've got your standard routine menu bar. Just beneath that, there's another menu bar, but this one's contextual, and this entire bar changes depending on which of these lovely tools you're using. Everything down here is a tool for either retouching or cropping, and we'll have a look at most of those over the course of these 2 sessions. Over on the other side, we've got a lot of panels, and as you can see, they've got really odd names in some cases. We'll talk about histograms, we'll talk about swatches and brushes, adjustments and layers and effects and styles, and down here there's another 4. So there's a lot to pick up, and I suspect that a lot of people open this program for the first time and just think, I can't cope. It's too much. There's too much to learn. And actually, it's much, much easier than it looks. And that's what I hope to bring across today. So, importantly, in the top left-hand corner, there's a group of very colourful icons. And at the moment, you can see that the Affinity Photo icon, which represents Affinity Photo, is illuminated, but there are 4 others. We'll be having a look at some, but not all of these. And I want to start in the, they call them personas. Persona is a really odd word because all it means is workspace. So depending on which one of these personas you're working in, the workspace will look slightly different. We'll have different panels, we'll have different tools available, as you'll see. So it's just hit Command O and absolutely nothing happens. That's because I'm in Zoom. That's better. Could I please trouble you just to and this is addressed to absolutely everybody. Can you just unmute yourself and say yes if you if you do not know what a raw image is?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Brave person, thank you, thank you,
Yes.
because
All right.
that kind of determines where we start talking. Okay, raw images. Oh, gosh, it's quite a complicated story. This all cameras, all digital cameras, whether they be incredibly sophisticated, incredibly expensive Leicas that cost thousands of dollars, or whether they be the lowliest, cheapest little $20 phone, all shoot raw images. And all that means is that when you take a photograph, when you record an image with your camera or your phone, all of that information pours through the lens into the device, and it is subsequently processed by the camera or the phone, whatever. But the raw image contains an absolute ton of information. And now, historically, professionals, the uptake with professionals was pretty fast. The uptake with amateurs was pretty slow because raw images take up a lot of file space. Even today, if you buy an iPhone 12 and you shoot raw, each image occupies about 25 megabytes, which is huge when you consider, if you're anything like me, I come home with, I daren't tell you how many images from holiday, a typical holiday, but we're talking four figures. So initially, the hardware to store all of those images was expensive. So people said, no, I'm quite happy with my JPEGs. But so what happens is all of this raw information arrives at the camera. It's processed, and for most people, it gets turned into a JPEG. Now, a JPEG is 8-bit, and what that means is that it's capable of showing 256 levels of each of the red, green, and blue channels that make up a color image like the one we're looking at the moment. I wrote down the number because I can never remember it. An iPhone 12 is 12-bit, and the difference between 8-bit and 12-bit is the difference between 256 and 4096. So it's absolutely colossal. So what does all this stuff mean? It means this: if you get your exposure wrong, if you're working with a raw image, there's a much bigger chance you'll be able to repair that image because it's got lots and lots and lots of data stored away in its 25 megabytes or whatever. If you do the same thing with the JPEG, chances are it will look horrible and grotty and dirty. It's the best word I can think of to describe it. So subsequently, these days, most professionals, maybe all professionals, shoot raw because it means that if they make mistakes, there's a better chance that they'll be recoverable. And I think most amateurs are turning towards it now for the same reason. So we're starting in the develop module, which is up. Can you see that this develop persona is now illuminated? And this is where specifically raw images come for processing. So another way, a good way to look at this is that raw processing on a building site, raw processing is a bit like the cement mixers and the cranes and the really, really big bits of machinery that come in to start the build and get it up on its legs. When we then transfer, once we've done that processing and we turn our image perhaps to a JPEG or something like that, that's when we go at it with the tools to improve the image. And that's a bit more like the artists that come in and paint the skirting board and the picture rails and put up the wallpaper. So it's the sort of the lighter stuff, if you like. So let's just have a look at a couple of images and let's just describe what we're looking at here. So this is Pigeon Point on Big Sur, which I love Big Sur, and we've travelled it 4 times, and this was the only time that we saw it in reasonable weather. Importantly, does anybody not know what a histogram is? Can you just say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I hope you bought sandwiches, because this could be a very long meeting. So up in the top right hand corner, all it means is it's a posh word for graph. Okay, but what we have here is the red content, the green content, and the blue content of all the pixels that make up this image of this lighthouse on the cliffs. And at this end of the scale, just there, is the black point, and at this end of the scale is the white point. And all the tones and colours in between black and white are illustrated in this graph. And as we progress through these images, you'll see why that's really important. At the moment, this is a very healthy looking histogram. We've got black values. Sometimes the graph ends, for example, up here, and it means that there are no dark greys and no blacks in the image. Sometimes the graph ends here, and it means that there are no whites or pale tones in the image. And all of this is correctable. On this particular image, thankfully, there aren't any problems. So underneath the histogram, and everything is kind of presented to you in the order that you need to work on them, are sliders that I hope you'll all recognise, because they're sliders that are not dissimilar actually to Apple Photos. They're logical, they're easy to use, and just to give you an example, I'd pick up the exposure. If I drag it right, it gets too bright. If I drag it left, it gets dark. Now, you saw some really weird colours happening there, and that is because the program tells you if the blacks are so black that there won't be any detail in them, or the whites are so white that there won't be any detail in them. And if I just ram the exposure down, it's not going to work. I don't know why. Let's try the black point. Here we go. So when I raise the black point, you can see the histogram above it just all sliding to the left to the dark end of the scale. And you can see these big blue areas appearing, and those blue areas designate areas where if you make a print, or indeed if you project this as a slide, there won't be any shadow detail, there'll just be solid black. So I need to ease that back until all those little dots disappear. Over here on the lighthouse, we've got some highlight issues. I'm not too sure I care in this particular instance, because obviously the sun's hitting this lighthouse from this side, but the red here shows that there's absolutely no detail. So this is completely burnt out white. I might care to adjust the brightness. Now there's detail in absolutely everything. Under that, we have contrast, or the contrast for this image is just fine. We have a clarity slider, and so clarity is a sort of mid-tone contrast. It has much less, a much more subtle effect than shifting the contrast slider. And if you just look at this area here where there are these tiny spots of violet, and you can see it just increases the contrast a bit. Then we've got saturation and vibrance. And we all know what saturation is. It'll whap the colours up strong or push them right back to black and white. And vibrance is incredibly clever. So vibrance recognises really saturated colours and leaves them alone. It also recognises flesh tones, so it leaves flesh tones alone. And as you raise the vibrance, it just increases the saturation of the less saturated colours, if that makes any sense at all. Under that, we've got a white balance, so we can adjust the colour, the general colour. This doesn't need a white balance change. It's perfectly adequate. Under that, these all speak for themselves. There's a shadows and highlights slider, so if I wanted to bump up the brightness in the shadows, I can do that, and likewise with the highlights. Now, profiles, I'm not going to spend time here, but for most people, this just needs to be left at sRGB, because that's the output profile that most labs prefer. If you take your prints down, down to, I don't know what your version of Boots is. It would be Boots in the UK, but wherever it is. Importantly, down at the bottom here, we've got something called history. I actually don't think any of these other panels are particularly important, because I don't need a 32-bit preview and stuff. It's irrelevant. But the history column is really important. The panel records every single thing that you do whilst you're working on the image. And you can go back through history. If you make a mistake, I can either slide this back until I find the state that I wanted to go back to, or I can just pick and mix as necessary. So this is really good if you make a mistake and you don't realize that you've made a mistake for a while, because it can get you out of a lot of trouble. And that's it there. We'll talk about these other panels in a mo. We have a small number of tools, and certainly enough to get your head around. The hand tool is just the viewing tool, and zoom tool speak for themselves. So if I zoom in, there's a shortcut for the hand tool, which is the space bar, and when I hold the space bar down, I can drag around in the image, so I can see stuff up nice and close. There's a really, really important shortcut that takes everything back to the full screen default, which is Command 0. There we go. There's a red eye tool. I am delighted to say I don't take pictures with red eye, but if you do, this little tool will get rid of it absolutely instantly. There's a little blemish removal tool, but I want to talk about that later, because I think this is much better done at a later stage. Then we come on to some interesting things. So the overlay tool is basically a paintbrush. Now, really importantly with the paintbrush, you can change the size of the brush using the square arrow keys on your keyboard. So if I click the left bracket key, the brush gets smaller. And if I click the right bracket key, the brush gets bigger. And why is this important? Because let's say we want to brighten up these really dark rocks down here. It means I can start with a thumping great big brush. And don't worry about the color. I'll explain that in a minute. But I can start with a big brush, and then I can decrease its size to get into the... Needless to say, I'm not going to waste time on this. I'm going to be really brutal and rough, but you get the idea. So I can do this with pinpoint accuracy if I need to. The tool next to the brush is an erase tool. So if I make a mistake, I can just pick this up and take the bits out that shouldn't have been covered. Having done that, if I'm happy with my selection, I can go over to the panel here, and the moment I start making changes, the red overlay that's there, that's designed just so that you can see where you're painting, the red overlay disappears and you can see exactly what you're doing. So at the moment, I'm brightening those rocks, but I'm not making any difference to anything else. Every single other element of the image has remained exactly as it was. So that's them. Next one down is the overlay gradient tool. And it works the same way, except it produces a gradient. So for example, if I wanted to darken off the sky a bit, I could drag a gradient down like that, and then come over here and again mess with the exposure. And so that's darkening the top of the image. It's not ideal because of course it's darkening the top of the lighthouse as well. So one would have to proceed very carefully there. There are better ways to do this, which we'll talk about a bit later. But hopefully you get the idea. And all of this is editable. So if I don't like what I've done, I can move the start and end points. So that's that. Then we've got a crop tool. And this image really doesn't need cropping. However, I don't know if you've noticed, but the horizon, this is me on holiday, not paying enough attention. The horizon isn't horizontal. So up here, we've got a straighten button, and I can drag a line across what I know should be horizontal, and that will correct it for me. I think we're about there. Now, because this is a raw image, you can't just print this. You have to export it, okay? And to do that, you just hit the develop button up here. I'm not going to do that because I don't, well, actually, yes, I will. I'll just send it to the desktop. So that's now developed. And can you see we've now moved from the develop persona into the photo persona. So now we have an image, but it's surrounded by different tools and it's surrounded by different panels. So I need to go back to the develop persona and another image. So I do quite a lot, or did quite a lot of photography in local schools, and this nonsense is something that takes place every year immediately after these kids finish their final grade year at this particular local school. It's a naval school, and you can see there are a few issues with it, but I can correct these in no time at all because I can pull down the brightness just so that I can see detail in their shirts. Everything else looks all right, apart from the perspective, which is really ugly. And one of the many techniques that this lovely program offers is a lens panel just here. Just keep forgetting to enlarge these so that you can see them better. But the lens panel, it has lens correction, but this needs more than lens correction. Lens correction happens by default. So you'll always get the best geometry in images because it will correct that automatically when you bring it in. In the case like this, where we've got to make major changes to the verticals, all I need to do is pick up the vertical slider. And it's a bit like revolving the image towards me until that line looks pretty parallel with that line. And then it's introduced some stuff where there isn't any information, so obviously we'll need to crop that out. So I can go to the crop tool. Just going to drag that in, and I've not done a bad job there. I could tweak it further if I wanted, but there's no time. So I'm just going to pull those in. And once again, that's ready to go. So I can just hit the develop button, and that will leave the develop module and persona, and it will go to the photo persona. So what else have we got here? Effects I do use sometimes, but I'll come to those shortly. And we also have stars. No idea what they are. Don't care. So and something called stock. If you use stock images, which I can't imagine any amateurs do, but it's there if you want it. You can make any changes you want to the program. So I know I don't use stock, so I'm just going to pull it out and close it. I never use stars, so I can pull that out and close it. As I said, apart from history, I don't use any of these. I don't care about the transform panel. I don't care about the navigator panel. I prefer to use my hand. And I don't use channels. much. Those I probably would use, but already I've made this a much simpler interface because I've hidden half of the panels. They're still available. All I have to do is get to go to View and Studio and Reset Studio, and that will return everything to its default position. Okay, so I don't want to carry on work on these two images, so I'm just going to close these. I don't know if you've noticed, but my cat's really quiet. I think she's got the hint. This is fantastic. And let's open some more. So what happens is, so this is the persona in which everyone spends most time. It's the photo persona. Lots and lots of tools, lots and lots of panels, so much to explain. And I'm just going to hint at it because one could spend 2 or 3 hours just on this particular display. The most important thing to try and explain is layers. Now, Affinity Photo produces a non-destructive editing system. And what that means is that whatever you do to this image, as long as you don't export it, because the exported image will be fixed somewhat. So as long as you can save it, and it'll get saved as a .af photo file. The .af photo file still contains a ton of information. Okay, and it uses layers so that each time we make a change now to this image, a new layer will be introduced with those changes on, and I'll illustrate that in just a second. It's a bit like Disney and old-fashioned animated cartoons. So you have a base layer which has the background painting on it, and then you have layers of celluloid, and each one has got different moving elements of the cartoon above it. So just to give you an example, this is obviously a snowscape which is horribly underexposed, not one of mine. Paul, who took it, may even be with us this afternoon. This happens typically because automatic exposure systems are designed to read everything as mid-tone grey. So if it looks at a completely white landscape, it will assume that that white landscape is actually mid-tone grey. So subsequently, white tends to end up being badly underexposed. So what can we do about this? So we go to the adjustments panel. As you can see, there's a frightening number of adjustments available. I'm going to use 2 probably today. But lots to play with, and playing is the answer to all questions, really. If you don't know what something means, I don't think there's anything. I'm not sure what threshold is, so if I didn't know what threshold was, I'd just click on it, move my mouse around and see what happens, and quickly learn. I need to make a levels adjustment here. Now, this is really useful. Do you remember earlier I said that the histogram was a description of all of the pixels in the image? And you can see in this particular image, all of the pixels are bunched up at the left-hand end. And remember that this is the black point and this is the white point. So there's a spike there of pixels, and that of course is the sun. But then there's no white for any of this huge patch of the histogram. And what we need to do is to drag this point out to this point. And we do that very, very simply by picking up the white level slider and moving it left. And if I hold down the Option key while I'm doing this, I can actually see when things begin to burn out. So everything that's dark blue there is going to be burnt out. Actually, because it's snow, I don't care, because they're tiny thin lines. But how much better that looks. Oh, what have I just done? No idea. I'm just going to reset that. That's better. So we've got a slider called gamma, and the gamma slider moves the midpoint brightness backwards and forwards. So I'm just going to move that to the left because that will just pull out a little bit more detail in the snow. So we've gone from that to that with one tiny slider, and it looks so much better, so much better. Let's have a look at another one. Oh, I wanted to show you this because this is another levels. Sorry, levels feature in a lot of apps. Levels adjustments feature in just about every app. I think levels adjustments are, you know, they're available in Photos and everything else. But here's something you absolutely cannot do in Photos, and this is absolutely incredible. I'm just going to open a levels adjustment layer again. And you can see that we've got no dark to black pixels, and we've got hardly any white to pale pixels. And you can see the red pixels and the green pixels and the blue pixels, and the white bit are where they all converge and they're the same value. Now, this has a horrible color cast. So I could just pull the black level slider into the histogram, and now it's brighter, but it's still ugly. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is have a look at each of these three values independently. So you can see we've got a little drop down menu just here. It's currently set to master. I'm just going to set that to red. I'll just do this really quickly and just pull those sliders in specifically for the red pixel values. Then I'm going to go to green. And then I'm going to go to blue. And just look at that difference. So that's taken all of 30 seconds, and we've gone from that horrible, muddy, nasty image to this incredibly bright, vibrant, beautiful image. I've used this a lot because my mum had a shoebox full of old family photos under the bed, and on her 80th birthday we presented her with a book that we made of old family photos, and every single colour picture in the box had faded and gone odd colours, of mostly magenta, and in every single case I was able to fix them using this technique. So it's really, really worth tucking away in the brain for future use. Oh, what's next? Oh, I need to talk about layers. So I mentioned that each time you do something, a new layer appears. And for this particular image here, you can see the background layer, and above it, you can see the levels adjustment layer that we've just created by making these changes. So when I save this, that layer is also recorded. So if, for example, I came back to this tomorrow and I thought, do you know what, there's too much blue in that, all I've got to do is double click on the levels adjustment layer, and this box opens, and I can just pick up where I left off, which is absolutely sensational, and not something that you can do with JPEGs, because you can't save layers in JPEGs. Let's move on. And I can't remember what's next. Oh yes. So we saw this image earlier, and I talked about exporting the image from the developed persona to the photo persona, which is where it now rests. So what might we do? I'd say this is your favorite image of your holiday. I hope it wouldn't be, but let's say this is a really important picture. Let's say you own the lighthouse and you really like this picture, and you'd like to kind of put a mount around it and make it look a bit more presentable. So how do I do that? Well, it's actually really easy. I go up to the document menu, just here, and I choose resize canvas. And you can see this funny looking patchwork down here where you need to set an anchor point. And I want my border to expand in all directions. So I need to move that to the center so that when I add some width and height, it will grow on both sides and top and bottom. Now, units in pixels is of no use to me. I'm going to change to inches. I'm also going to unlock this padlock because I want to add exactly 2 inches to the width and exactly 2 inches to the height. So I'm going to change that 8 to a 10. And I'm going to change that 5 to a 7. And I'm going to click resize. So what we have now is our lovely image with a 1 inch wide border around it. Now we need to fill that border, but before we do, I'm going to put this background on a separate layer. So I'm going to come over here to this icon here that looks like a checkerboard, click on it, and that produces a new empty layer because this is empty. I'm going to move it behind the image of the lighthouse. And then over here in the toolbox, we've got, it's called a flood fill tool. And I think it's called a flood fill tool because in Photoshop, it's called the paint bucket. But of course they couldn't call it paint bucket because Adobe called theirs the paint bucket. So it's got a different name. So I'm just going to click on that. I need to make sure that the foreground color, which is here, is white. And I'm just going to click. And there we are. So that's now filled the border with white. And just to finish this off, I really like placing a very fine black line around my images. And I can do that from the effects palette, just here, and outline here. And if I just whop the radius up so that you can just see what happens, absolutely nothing. Why is that?
You don't have the correct layer selected.
Thanks very much, Sheeta. Yep, good advice there. If nothing happens, change layers. Right, let's try again. Opacity 100%, radius. That's what I wanted to see. Now you can see it's got, it's far too big at the moment, but I just did this to illustrate that it has these horrible curved corners, which are really ugly. And we need to fix that. And we fix that by putting the stroke, the outline, inside rather than outside the boundaries of the image. And we do that from this little cog here. And you can see it says alignment outside. And if I just change that to inside, we're fixed, but it's far too big. So I'm just going to pull it right back to something I like. And suddenly this photograph looks like a piece of art. And it's really easy. It's really easy. And this is the thing. There's tons and tons of stuff in this program, but most of it's really easy once you kind of know it's there and start playing with it. Let's move on. I want to talk about montages next. So how do you combine several images? And I'm going to open 4. Does anybody know this place? I'm gobsmacked. Okay, so this is
Zion
Angels Land.
National Park.
Hooray! It's my favourite place on the planet. We've been in this park more times than anywhere else outside the UK that I've ever holidayed, and this is the most exciting hike of your life as you go up this to the summit.
It's Angel's Landing, isn't it?
It is. You're dead right. And there's a particular section of Angel's Landing which is about 1 meter wide, and it has sheer drop-offs on both sides. So you need a steel heart. But it's fabulous. It's so exciting. Just brilliant. And as I said, my favourite place on the planet, which is why I'm using it for this purpose. So I have this, which I want to use as a background. And I've got 3 images, one from the top, looking down the valley. One of me, just to prove I was there, standing on the top. And another one of me, somewhat exhausted, dangling my feet over the edge. So the deal is I want to place these 3 images inside this image. And it's a simple, you all know these shortcuts. Command A for select all. Command C to copy it. We move to the background and we hit Command V to paste it. Now it's way too big at the moment, but when I click on the move tool here, these little grab handles appear and I can make this whatever size I want. Now I'd forgotten to do something, and that was I wanted to pull in some guidelines, and to pull in guidelines, all you do with the move tool selected is place the cursor in the ruler and drag it across. And I'm going to put one about there and one about there. And then I'm going to drag this. And it sort of snaps to it. So, whoops. So that I know that it's exactly fitting that space. I can also, not sure where the middle of this image is, but it should, there we are. So it's just found the middle for me and dropped itself into that position. So that's that one done. We'll move to this one. Command A, Command C, Command V, and some hasty resizing. And is that the other one? Yeah. So Command A, Command C, Command V. Now I don't know why it's done that, but the layer, and I'll show you the layers palette in just a moment, but the layer that this has decided to drop itself onto is underneath the layer with this little image on, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't make any difference what order they're in. So actually, I think I'm going to put that one in the middle. And if we have a look at the layers panel now, you can see that we've got 4. So that's the top one, that's the middle one, that's the bottom one, and then of course we've got the background image. And job's done, almost. I just want to select these 3 layers, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click on the other 2, and then go up here to this icon, which is an alignment icon, and just click this icon here. Do you see it says space vertically? And that will just guarantee that that little distance there is the same as that little distance there. And you know what I was saying about not losing anything if you save this image now you'll save it as a .af photo file. And an extraordinary thing happens, which really, really, really surprised me. And it's something that Photoshop doesn't offer. And bear in mind that Photoshop, even for photographers, Photoshop in this country costs more than £10 a month. So it's about I think it's about £120 a year. This whole program, if you buy it while it's on sale, you can usually pick up AF Photo for about $25. It's ridiculously cheap. Even at full price, it's only $50. So it's a fraction of the price of 1 year's rent of Photoshop. So Photoshop offers something called smart images. And what that means is you can convert images to smart. And what that means is that, you know, they started the size of the screen, and I've contracted them down to these tiny little images. If you've converted them, all of that original information is carried with the image. But you have to remember to convert them, because if you don't, let's say, I can't remember which one I did. I think it might have been with this one. So if let's say I've just saved this, but then I change my mind and I decide to use this as the background image. Whoops. When I enlarge it, all of that information has been retained. So it's as sharp as it ever was. Okay. And I took a screen grab of a Photoshop document, which I'll just show you so you can compare the two. So that's exactly the same system, but done in Photoshop without converting to a smart object. And you can see it's absolute rubbish. So if I'd done this in Photoshop and I'd forgotten to convert the images to smart objects, I'd have to start again. So hats off to wonderful, wonderful, wonderful wonderful people at Affinity Photo. It's terribly quiet, Sheeta. Are there any questions bubbling around?
Yes, there are.
I've stunned everybody into silence.
No, what I wanted to do was allow you to get into your presentation before we started asking questions, because some of the questions really can be a little general. We're going to start with Victoria. Victoria, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? And are you there, Victoria? Victoria isn't here, but Victoria's question was that how does this app compare to some of the others like Luminar, and which say they are a replacement for aperture?
I can't answer that because I'm not familiar with Luminar, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I think from everything that I've ever read, and certainly talking with professional colleagues here in Suffolk, I believe that this program is the one that is most like Photoshop. So if you're using Photoshop regularly, and you decide to drop it, this is the place where you're most likely to feel comfortable, because although the tools all have slightly different names, they all do exactly the same thing. It's staggeringly similar.
Okay. Are you familiar at all with Pixelmator and how it would compare to Affinity Photo?
No,
okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm kind of guessing Pixelmator Pro is probably a great deal like this, but there's
okay.
a limit to the amount of apps this feeble brain can cope with.
I totally feel you on that. I totally do. I know exactly where you're coming from. Billy McKee, you had an interesting comment. Can you unmute yourself and explain what you mean?
Hi, Billy.
Hi, me again. This is a fairly wide-ranging audience, and one of the big discoveries I made when I hit this type of software was 100%, and it's not something that is talked about early on, but just telling people, say for example, sharpness in images, they might look okay at full screen. You go in at 100%, especially on a 24 or 42 meg image, You'll see a heck of a difference.
I will be demoing that.
Fine. Okay. Done.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And let's get in one or two other questions. A question, can you open Photoshop files in Affinity Photo?
Yes.
Okay. And Muffy, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I hate to say this, I forgot my question.
That's all right. I know your question. Is there a regular user manual that goes with the program?
No. Well, oh no, sorry. There is, and I wonder if I have. I sold. They do this absolutely gigantic, beautiful, fantastically illustrated book, and it's about 1.5 inches thick, and it weighs more than a brick because it's printed on really, really good quality paper. It's absolutely lovely. I think it's just called the Affinity Photo Workbook, and the time to buy it is next time there's a Black Friday sale. I think in this country it's sold for £35, so it may be $35 in the US. I'm afraid I don't know, but Affinity are really generous when they, when they have a sale, and everything goes out at half price. So it's worth hanging around for the next Black Friday.
All right. Okay. Frank just held up a book. Frank, was that book Affinity Photo or what was it? We can't hear you, Frank.
Okay, it's Affinity Photos workbook,
That's the one.
and it's start to finish. I don't know if you can see these sort of things that they do, but they give you a lot of secrets and things like that. This is an excellent, excellent book.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. The next question. I'm sorry.
Is that me next?
No, you're not next.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Bob McKenzie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, thank you. Mike, I quite agree with you that it's very Photoshop-like. I'm wondering if it also will let you import short video sequences and modify them before you export them as still sequences for animation?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's probably no, because I've not seen it referenced in any of the books that I've read. But I'm afraid I don't know, because I don't have anything to do with that particular.
Yeah. At that price point, I'm not surprised.
All right, and that technique is called rotoscoping. I've actually done it, and when it works, it's wonderful. Okay, Jarrett, you are next. Jared Billmeyer, you have a comment, question?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, two questions, really. Yes. At what point is this totally non-destructive until you set it for printing or exporting?
Yes. So you start in the, let's assume that you're shooting RAW, which most people do. So you start in the develop module. You export from the develop module to the photo. It's not, I keep using the word module, I'm sorry, it's called a persona. You export to the photo persona. If you save your file at that point, it is saved as a .af photo file, okay? So it isn't until you export that, so you resize it and do all the stuff you do ready to print, and then you export it as a JPEG or whatever, or a TIFF or whatever you want to export as, and that's the point at which everything changes. That's the point at which perhaps a 12-bit image becomes an 8-bit image, because you're saving as a JPEG, because JPEGs are 8-bit. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does. One other thing that I have encountered is that if I'm working, I have it, I love it. I have it in the develop persona.
Yep.
And if I try to exit the program and don't take the image back to the desktop, it won't let me do it. It's smarter than the average bear.
So the reason for that is that it doesn't create, Sheeta will love this. It doesn't create
Okay.
things called XMP files. In other words, it doesn't save a record of all of the changes you make to that raw image. So it leaves the raw image absolutely alone. It doesn't make any changes. It doesn't screw it up. It can't screw it up. It just leaves it in exactly pixel for pixel the form that you brought it into the program in. So you have to save out of that develop persona in order to save those changes as a .af photo file. So it's a safety measure, basically saying, don't be dumb.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jarrett. And Mike, I just save it as a digital negative and I don't have to worry about those dumb XMP
Yes, I know,
files.
but we're not talking about.
I know. Okay, Frank, you're next.
Yes, I'm kind of a Topaz fan, and that's a really crazy piece of software that I love
I
for my
use some of them.
photos. Pardon? Okay, you know it. Right, okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the styles photo on Affinity Photo and see what they mean by styles, because all I see are gears.
And I don't use it, so which is why I ditched it. Sorry.
All right. Okay.
So
one last question.
Explore
All right.
it. Yeah.
All right. One last question before we let you go back. Jill has a question about is now a good time to buy the program in the UK? Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I just wondered whether it's on sale now or whether it's.
I've not checked today, but I don't think so, because the guys at Serif did this incredible thing, recognizing that everybody in the arts, particularly, and that including designers, for example, everybody would be having a really rough time through COVID, and they also had the smart sense to think, but if they've got nothing to do, they could be learning our program. So all the way through through COVID, I think for the best part of a year, they offered all of their programs at half price. So I suspect that the next time that we'll see them at half price will be the next Black Friday, whenever that is. But not at the moment. But it is only it's £50 in the UK.
And that's a one-off purchase then. What about when it needs updating?
Well, I don't know when that will be, and neither do they, because they've said that they will only ever charge if it's if it's a major upgrade, and they've not charged once since they introduced Affinity Photo, which was, I think, 4 years ago.
Right. Thank you.
It's they're not going to. They're not going to take advantage of people in the way that Adobe do.
Good. Thank you.
All right, Mike, all yours.
Thank you. So moving on, just want to talk about cutting stuff out. So what I've got here is, and this is a huge topic, and again, I could spend 4 hours on this. So it's a bit rough and ready, but just to give you an idea, what I've got here is Barcelona rooftop Gaudi chimney shot, and a completely inappropriate sky, which I've chosen just because it's of its dark colours and the contrast against this. So what I want to do is replace this sky with that one. So I'm going to do the same old thing, Command A to copy it, Command C to copy it, go over to my sky shot, hit Command V. So now we've got 2 layers over here, and we've got our Gaudi chimneys on the top layer, and we've got the skyscape on the second layer. Now there are 3 tools that we need to worry about for cutting stuff out, and I'm going to cheat here because it takes a lot of fiddling to get these numbers right. But there's something called the Flood Select tool, which is exactly the same as the Magic Wand tool in Photoshop. And there's a selection brush tool. Okay. And beneath that, and I should have taken it back to this position because that's where it defaults. This square marquee thing is basically just used for drawing rectangles, and we'll be doing that in just a moment. But beneath that are circles, single column. I don't really know what the point of a column marquee tool is. I've never used it, and Sheeta, you could probably enlighten me. But certainly in my business, I never need rows of pixels. Most importantly here, there's a freehand selection tool, and I'll be using that any second now. So,
Okay.
so
Mike,
the deal here is this.
Mike,
Yes.
I'm sorry, you have 10 minutes. You wanted to be
right,
notified.
crikey.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
It's much easier in this shot to cut out the sky than it is to choose the buildings for obvious reasons. And I'm going to use the flood select tool. It's set to 20% tolerance, and tolerance is an indication of the, when you click on a pixel, it will examine that pixel and it will say, okay, so if pixels are up to 20% darker than this or 20% lighter than this, I'm going to pick them up. And I happen to know that for this particular shot, 18 works. But that's a trial and error job. So I'm just going to click now. And look what an incredible job it's done. So yes, there are issues. There's a few little dots here, which we can pick up in a moment. Importantly, there's a bit of this pale bluey green which it's picked up, which we do need to do something about because that's serious. And then down here, it's not picked up that entire skyscraper in the distance. So to address these dots first, we need to add to the selection. So I need to click this button here to add, and I'm just going to click here. So that's done that one. Let's do this one next. I'm just going to zoom in on it a bit. So that's Command Spacebar and drag because it's quick and easy. And now I'm going to pick up this freehand selection tool. And I need to subtract this from the selection because bear in mind that the sky is our selection. So I need to get rid of this. It shouldn't be part of it. So I'm going to click on subtract up here at the top. And I'm very carefully going to do that, and that will do. And the only other remaining issue is this building here, which for some reason didn't like the tool. So I'm going to pick up that rectangular marquee. I still want to be on subtract because I need to take them out of the selection, and I'm carefully going to I'm working against the clock here, so forgive me if I make any mistakes. Just whip that out, and there we are. So now I've got another bit here, and there are one or two other little bits, but just to illustrate, I'm just going to pick up the same tool and just click in there. So that'll pick that section out. Now all I've got to do is hit the delete button, and there we are, and Command D to get rid of the. So that's done a really quick job. Have I got time for one more? I think so.
Yes, go ahead.
So just to illustrate the use of the other tool, Guy, where are we? Heliconia, I believe. Let's have a quick look at how the selection brush tool works. And this is where using the square arrow keys comes into its own, because all you have to do with this brush is paint, and it will look for edges. So it's absolutely essential that you remain inside the selection all the time, but just look how easy this is. and it's gone wrong. I'm trying desperately not to let the clock beat me, but as you can see, I've picked up a few areas that that I shouldn't have done. So I need to hit the subtract key button, sorry, up on the top left here, and get to work on this green. You know, I did this earlier this afternoon, and did it in about 30 seconds without making a single mistake, and it's always the way with live demos, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Okay, you get the idea. So you've got your subtract button if you make any mistakes, and you need to spend several minutes on this rather than 30 seconds. But already I can now hit the Command C button to copy that and paste it into a completely inappropriate background. Now, whoops. The reason that I have the completely inappropriate background, and this is a wonderful place to finish today's chat, is to show you a magic trick that David Copperfield would be proud of. I wanted to see how it worked with a really fuzzy subject, okay? And this isn't mine. I found this on the internet. It was on Google. I just Googled something like flyaway hair, so I've no idea who took this. But just watch how astounding this is, because you've got no edges here at all. It's soft, fuzzy, out of focusness for the most part. So I'm going to use the same tool. Whoops. And pick up the model very roughly. I'm going to pick up all of the clumps of hair where it's quite thick, but without any particular accuracy. I think this program is worth the price on the box just for this, as far as I'm concerned, because when it works, and it won't work in 30 seconds, but when it works, it's absolutely sensational. So I've made a rough selection now of the girl, of the main clumps of her hair. And up at the top, we have a refine button, which I'm going to click. And it does a bit of maths and creates this. And now, with my brush a little bit bigger, I just trace around the edge of the subject, but this time I take in any loose bits that I've overlooked. There's another one there. I'm going to do this in several stages because it's using a lot of processing power. Oh, let's go mad. Catch these stray hairs down at the bottom. This is going to be very rough because it does require a bit more time really spent on it. But now I'm just going to hit the apply button in the dialog box just there. And of course, marching ants, these marching ants as they're called, they can't they can't show you rough, they can't show you soft edges, unfortunately, because they're hard edged. So it looks like a very hard selection. But if I now copy this, and I'm just going to turn the flower off. In fact, let's get rid of it completely. And Command V. Isn't that astonishing? So I don't know how many seconds that was, but it can't be much more than 2 minutes, and it's almost there. We've got one or two little bits that needed a bit of attention, but you know, a little bit more careful brushwork, and we've just done the impossible. And look, even these stray single hairs, it's absolutely astounding. All yours for 50 quid. Actually, no, sorry, all yours for $50, which is 2/3 of 50 quid. You lucky people.
That's great.
Look at that, it's 1:45, and this is a fantastic place to stop. So
Okay.
I really hope this has been helpful for you.
I think it certainly have. We have quite a few people who are interested in your course, and I'll get that information to you, Mike. Thank you again.